So in this segment, we're going to be talking about Brexit caused a third of UK price inflation, according to the London School of Economics. And this study that they've done is flawed slightly, or at least it's not flawed. It's narrow in scope, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. So Brexit is responsible for a third of UK food price inflation since 2019, according to research done by the LSE that undermines efforts by the government to show the EU divorce has benefited Britain. So the bit by LSE, it's important to note that they're only looking at non-tariff barriers. They don't look at currency fluctuations because the Great British Pound has dropped off a lot since 2016. I think the euro has taken a hit too since then, but that's against the dollar more than anything. Around the referendum, £1 was worth around 1.3 euros, give a bit, but now it's around 1.16, give or take a bit, depending on the day. But sterling has had some very steep drops since the referendum, where it was before, and it's been really bad. And this lowering of currency makes imports more expensive. We're a nation that imports a lot of food, and that's problematic. Not necessarily the importing of food, but the currency fluctuations. The loss of HGV drivers because EU-based ones are reluctant to get stuck in the Dover-Calais crossing for hours and days because of Brexit. You've got other kind of rules that hinder them as well. And the fact that driving England for them is just not, or the UK for them is not great. They have much better facilities in most of the European countries. The loss of agricultural workers and workers in processing food, import shortages due to the paperwork. LSE did not factor some of these things in, so I don't know what the true cost would be when you factor this stuff in. But non-tariff barriers alone have added £7 billion to food bills since Brexit. It's mental. Regulatory, sanitary, and other border checks added almost £7 billion. To total domestic grocery bills over the period from December 2019 to March 2023, or £250 per household, economists at the LSE performance said. Prices rose by 25% over this period rather than the 17% they would have gained if Britain had stayed in the EU single market, they have said. £250 a month for shopping is a lot of money. That's a very sharp increase. Obviously, it would depend on what you're buying and things like that. It would be one thing, it'd be one of the things fueling the cost of living crisis for sure. We're seeing food bills becoming more and more of a concern over even energy bills, which is very concerning. The government stepped in regarding help with energy bills, but they did not go anywhere near far enough. Will they do the same for food bills? Probably not, but this does show you how dire things are right now. It is pretty scary, honestly. And you got to factor in we're still not doing full import checks yet. That's a different video I'm going to cover at some other point, hopefully. But there are still fears about some of the import checks kicking in this year that are going to add even more to food costs. We're still waiting to see what the government's going to do regarding that and how serious they are. The findings come amid signs that inflation is becoming entrenched, and the cost of living crisis is now a largely domestic problem, with YouGov polling showing more than 2/3 of Britain say the government is handling the EU departure badly. They also put pressure on Rishi Sunak to show that he's delivering the benefits of Brexit. You had even Mark Carney talking about how the UK's inflation is going to be pretty stubborn, and that Brexit has played a large part in that. But the geezer's Canadian. What does he know about British economics, really? That's what Brexiteers said anyways at the time. Sunak told reporters on a visit to Japan he believes in Brexit, and his Conservative government has already delivered benefits, including a cut to sales tax on sanitary products, reforms to alcohol duties that will result in cheaper beers in pubs, and reforms to the financial services system. But that's not persuading the British electorate. A YouGov survey on Sunday showed that 68% of Britons think the government is handling Brexit badly versus 22% who think it's going well. Some EU members have no taxes on sanitary products, and as we are, as we were a member of the EU, we could have pushed for that if we wanted to. In fact, if we got to zero VAT on sanitary products when we were in the EU, I doubt the EU would have done a lot about it if we just unilaterally cut it. I can't imagine the EU would really cause a fuss about it. But I guess people will hit you with the more sovereignty argument. But what use is a VAT cut when the prices for these products are undoubtedly going up because of the increased cost of haulage and other Brexit-related things? I'm not seeing the win here, but I guess a sovereign decision was made. He talks about the cut to beer duty and all of that stuff. I'm not sure if we could have done that as an EU member or not, but when you look at things like wine, the duty changes that Rishi Sunak has made has pushed up, certain kinds of alcohols like wine up significantly, or will do when they kick in, if they haven't done so. Britain's post-Brexit trading arrangement formally began in January 2021. Since then, food categories with a high reliance on imports from the EU, such as meat and cheese, have seen price increases, quote, in the region of 10% points higher relative to similar products not exposed to Brexit, end quote, the LSE paper has found. And It looks like this is the crux of their research, which seems like an okay methodology, I think, but it still has a lot of holes in it, in my opinion, because the headline rate that they put out, or at least that everyone's run with, just isn't true. Especially when, Brexiteers argue 7 billion is a lot lower than our net EU contribution. That's without them understanding what our contributions to the budget, actually went to help fund. All of these different regulatory bodies like REACH, we will have to replicate, which will cost billions of pounds and creates endless red tape. And also the fact that we can't actually replicate it because we don't have the facilities for that. But they knew what they voted for, right? Food prices in April supplanted energy as the main cause of forecast beating inflation, world beating inflation, I would say, if I were them. For the ONS said, that's a cause of concern for Sunak, that it's it is. Food prices are the biggest concern, especially when you can check week to week at the supermarket and you'll feel it. Week to week, month to month, how much higher your food bills are. Honestly, Chancellor of the Exchequer Jeremy Hunt, that's HUNT for YouTube, called a meeting of food manufacturers this week to ask the industry to work with the government to halve inflation, which is not going to happen. Industry won't do it unless they're forced to compete with each other. Some of the supermarkets are making huge profits. Do you really think they're going to give that up? Come on, dude. Sunak has promised to provide an extra 10,000 temporary visas for agricultural workers next year to ease wage pressures, and the Competition and Markets Authority is investigating the fuel and grocery sectors if there is any price gouging that is going on and can try and stamp it out, probably via fines. And we covered before how broken the visa system is for agricultural workers. It's not going to work. They can't go to work in different farms, so once their role is finished on one farm, that's it. They can't work anymore. And it doesn't make sense, and it can cause forced deportations because they won't be working because the system won't allow it. Never mind the huge fees they incur just to come here. It's a broken system. When growing numbers of people in Britain are forced to skip meals, it is tempting to blame the sellers, according to Bloomberg, but accusations of greedflation are misplaced apparently, because if anything, UK supermarkets are notoriously good at price competition, as the long-standing complaints of the British farmers attest. Their recent profit margins are within their historical range, and what is the historical range? The last 3 years, and in my opinion, this is cap anyways. What they're talking about. They've conflated two different things here. The supermarkets are good at buying low because they are generally the only buyer of farm produce, or they dominate the vast majority of buying, if that makes sense. Monosoppy, I think it's called. The price they choose to sell at is generally dictated by the market, how much people are willing to pay, or are forced to pay, because some of these goods are essentials. But what happens when the supermarkets, without really colluding, set a minimum price and just refuse to compete on key goods? We saw that with RAM prices a few years ago, albeit there were only three major producers of RAM, but all three charged comically high prices for the RAM and people were forced to pay it. If the supermarket set the price for milk at, say, £1.60 for a medium-sized carton of milk, and don't move from there, where are people going to buy the milk from any cheaper? Because the price floor has been set and they're all selling at a similar price, if that makes sense. They're not really competing with each other. It's more truce, if anything. This is a cost of greed crisis and a cost of living crisis. One has made one worse than the other. The article goes on to say, it makes more sense to blame the trade barriers that went up when Britain left the EU and its single market. Food trade is always going to be particularly hit by hard Brexit, given the tight regulatory controls and the greater cost added. Time entails for perishable shipments. Research from LSE suggests that nearly a third of the food price increases have been or can be attributed to those non-tariff barriers. And this is giving the impression that the supermarkets and also the companies making goods have not helped fuel this crisis, which is rubbish. LSE have said a third of the cost is just from non-tariff barriers. We have talked about potentially some of the other increases in costs for currency and other things, but there is still a gap there. And what about the rest I did lay out? The other factors earlier on. But if anyone tries to argue that greed and profiteering has not played a part in this, then I guess they can argue that the cost of energy crisis is just down to Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine. This is a cost of greed as well. These are companies who have seen a chance to rapidly profiteer and have increased their prices because they know the public are going to pay for it. Because what choice do you have? You can give up certain kinds of food. You can buy cheaper brands of certain foods, but you still have to buy food. And if those, the basic products keep going up in price, which some of them will do, when you look at the percentage increases, it's going to happen because they started so low. If something increases from, I'm not going to do the math here live because I'm trash at math. But, it does make sense that some of the more value products will go up significantly in terms of percentage increase. But, I've not seen the supermarkets or any one of these companies really justify the amount they're charging right now. Yes, they can blame Brexit and other things, but I think, given the amount of profits they're making, they're not struggling. they're still making ridiculous amounts of money. That tells me that it's not just a cost of living crisis. It's not just down to, quote, global factors. It's down to global profiteering. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. A like, comment, share, subscribe. Support the channel on Patreon if you can. And hopefully I'll see you in the next one.